let's jump into it. It is the 2nd of June, 9:36 a.m. on Tuesday morning. So, look, pretty eventful sort of Monday to sort of kick things off. And I actually just put a sort of post up on that, just sort of following the dollar from yesterday, because if you saw what the plan was on the weekend analysis, was that early lot of dollar strength, which is what we sort of got coming up into this point over here. And this is what I like to sort of see when you see these things. If you pick out a level, you expect the market to react there. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, that's it, that's the top. I mean, resistances, supports, they're there to be broken. But when they hold, that also tells you a story about what's happening. And really, if we unpack this latest sort of move with the dollar, really, overall, we're just sideways. More recently, though, we obviously had that sort of positioning coming into the weekend where we say there was a little bit of end of month flows, possibly profit taking, whatever you want to call it. Markets sort of like position themselves for potential positive Iran news over the weekend. That didn't eventuate. And so what happens? They peel off the position. That's fine. It comes up here, sellers move in exactly where we kind of thought they would. And then obviously that second move coming up through here was headline assisted. But what we've seen here is the big takeaway is that, look, it's actually reclaimed this bottom side of the support again. So it makes this a really just a little bit of a stop out. And all through this period here, although it sort of held and held and held, I said, look, any dips down into this area over here, expect them to be bought up. And that's exactly what we saw. And it actually played out very well because, yes, it sort of like was headline assisted, but as you can see, as soon as it took out that previous high, like the high that I put in on sort of like Asia session yesterday, it just went bang. And look at that. I mean, that's pretty much, I mean, these things are kind of obviously a bit of a wide range. I call it the zone, but that's it's kind of like sellers coming in, was that within a tenth of a cent, sort of marking that stuff out. So it's always nice when you sort of mark these things out, and the market tends to agree with the levels that you put in there. So look, we can take rid of this at the moment. Realistically, we can take rid of this. We can get rid of this, take it off. What we could do is turn this into a little bit of a zone. Zone. So we know that sort of like, obviously sort of, sellers are trying to push it down. They're trying to push it down, unable to do it. Boom, moved up, exploded up, bang, on with the show, onward sideways. Now, with these kind of headline moves and that, the job, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, the job we're kind of trying to determine at the moment is which one of these headlines is just a little bit of fluff and which one is actually going to sort of hold true. I mean, there's a portion of the market and, just society, and they're just like, everything Trump says is wrong. Yeah, okay, yeah, I think you sort of typecast yourself into like a detrimental position if you're just sort of so blinded to sort of say that, hey, look, yeah, Trump's wrong, so that's it. But regardless of that, we saw the Iranian people come out overnight and sort of say, hey, look, you know what, because of the attacks on Lebanon, that was a part of the ceasefire deal, and because that was essentially what they were looking for the ceasefire, that's now been violated. So that's what's so just we've got oil pushing down. Uh, There's my track of thought, no, with the oil. We've got sort of the violation of the ceasefire thing, and so we're going to stop communications through the mediator. Whoever, I don't know who the mediator was for them, but that was the general essence of the headline that sort of got oil moving, dollar moving, gold moving, Aussie moving, everything sort of reacted off that headline. Now this morning, we've already had sort of Trump come out and sort of say, hey, look, things are looking great and we're very close to a deal. Yeah, okay. Maybe in this instance, I'd have to sort of go in the camp of sort of, I think he's trying to sort of just quell the move of the market. I'm trying to think of a sort of a correct or right way to sort of say it, but to sort of like ease the burden of sort of these kind of accelerated moves. So say, hey, you know what, everything's okay. I don't know. I don't know. So I think the thing is at the moment, obviously we've seen the market sort of come back in. Yes, it's kissed this area, sold straight back down. We've got to see what happens should it come back to this zone here. Because realistically, the way that these sort of ranges work, top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, all those, that's fine. It's actually hit the top here. It's tested the top. So in theory, you've got the 2 points. One is kind of like a bit of a midway point because ranges generally all have a middle swing point, as you can see here above, sorry, here below, and it's pretty sort of similar if we mark this out. It's not fully like one line definitive thing, but something along this kind of line here. A bit fatter, make it a blue line, whatever. Anyway, whatever. The point being is that, if you get onto probably a decent enough time frame in that, you can kind of start to pick out where this thing's kind of sort of like, more or less you can see bounces, bounces, rejections, rejections, bounces, back and forth. And so basically, anyway, the longer it spends in the top half here, the more likely, obviously, it's to break out this way, and same with while it's on the sort of downside here. As you can see, it's coming back, it's holding around this zone here. So you've got to sort of see, look, was that Iranian headline a bit of fluff, or was the Trump follow-up headline a bit of fluff? And sort of we see these things sort of really sort of come back down and cool over here. Now, it's a bit tough, obviously, sort of like, so early in the session and that to sort of make that kind of call. But my feeling here is obviously this is probably a little bit of an over-exaggerated move, hence the sort of sell back down over here. So I wouldn't be surprised if you do see some sort of movement around here, but I just don't think that, Trump going, hey, you know what, actually the deal's happening next week, and we break back down to this side over here till you get something a little bit more concrete. And that's the tough thing at the moment because it's hard to sort of tell what is sort of concrete with this with these headlines. But this is why we look at a bunch of different markets. We look at what's happening with oil because oil obviously spiked up with this as well. You can see oil actually sort of came up very similar to the dollar, big spike up, and then okay, maybe not too bad, pulling back down over here, kind of thing. So I think if we start to see oil break higher, I think we know that these things kind of like aren't, the market's not buying what Trump's selling in the idea of, hey, we're right around the corner from getting a deal. I think sort of that'll be a big sort of indicator for what's happening with that, and I think dollar and oil sort of will sort of play together. So I do probably think that we are probably going to at least minimum sort of come back up and test over here. We've got a little bit of, if we just look at this as a basic little structure here, you can see internally, we've got the move down, resistance, boom. It's failed so far to take out this low. I mean, market's closed, so it's going to open up in literally 45 seconds. We're going to get an idea of a little bit of a gap. But should this level here hold, then that's the pullback structure done. And then we're going to come up a move like this. So you can see these sort of three wave things. You got your one wave up, let's move this direction. We're in pullback stage here, so we do have to have a third attempt here, in my opinion. So the question is this little pullback stage here done? So internally, you've got this structure going like this. Once we see that this base is the base that it's going to hold from, then we're going to expect this move here. Now, this is the third sort of leg that's going to give us that idea of, are we going to get a lower high, in which case we then start targeting down over here, or are we going to get a double top? Again, it kind of leads to more of a downside if we do find that they're sort of doing a double top there. Or are we finally going to break through to the top side there? You can see it's just opening up now and it's pretty flat, to be honest. Yeah, so it's actually very flat. Maybe a tiny little gap down, but not really. So I think if we get this out of the way here, this is what I'm kind of looking for at the moment, like a little sort of zone through here, adding zones and zones and zones on top of stuff. But this kind of little break here. I mean, this is on the 1 hour, which is generally, well, is lower than I sort of do on my on these analysis videos. However, I do think that this is the general sort of structure that we're looking for. So we're in pullback stage. Now we're trying to find of this little pullback stage, just between here and here, we found support, got resistance, found support again. If it can hold this zone here, hold 99.15 to 99.10, this area through here, and break above 99.22, that's pullback stage of the largest structure done, and then we're going to start to see a push up over here. So dollar strength through the session to see, are we going to get that lower high, double top, high high continuation. And again, as I said, like keep an eye on metals, keep an eye on the dollar. because if the metals start to break down lower, if we start to see oil break a bit higher, I think it's probably going to be a bit of an indicator about what we're going to see with the dollar. Cool. I should say as well, like this is the levels of pullback stage here. We've still got areas of support. Obviously, this little breakout zone range through here. When we see these big, massive candles driven as well, like that are sort of like realistically, let's be honest, it's headline driven. Generally, these things will undo at some stage. So even if we do break lower down here, I don't think that's a complete failure of the dollar. But obviously, it's just showing that the market's not as keen as you kind of think at this stage. And the deeper this pullback comes through here, the more likely we are to continue to see chop. Now, if we see a concerted effort for the buyers to push up, push up, push up, push up, then obviously that continued drive from the buyers is going to be putting more pressure on the top side for a potential breakout there. But certainly, I think above 99.20, excuse me, should give us a little bit of a push. Yeah, we're seeing sort of gold break a little bit lower now. So look, I'll pop onto gold and have a quick look at this here as well. Like, so we did get that incredible sort of push down through here. As you can see, this is the move we had sort of coming up from Thursday, was it? I think, yeah, Thursday was the push up through here. Come back, already given back 61% of that push to the top side there. And obviously buyers sort of coming in pretty much on cue of this previous resistance, like that little bounce resistance on the way up. And now it's sort of coming up to the top side over here. So look, I think it's interesting here. I think if we give up 80, then we're minimum going to be testing that 50 level there, because the structure is still, if we look at this in a short term, it's still coming in this sort of like, these bounces are very shallow. Coming down, bounce shallow. This bounce obviously is a little bit higher, but I still feel we need a move to here to see the buyers move up to then sort of push through like this. This move here was a bit too sort of just short, hard, and sharp. Like this, I said on Friday, I said on the weekend, and Alison maybe on Friday as well. This move through here didn't feel like, yes, he had this little push up over here, but where was the weekend? I think it was about here. Here we go. So here's where the weekend was. It just felt a bit more like, okay, I guess we put the positions on. I guess we put the positions on. Even when you had the spike up here, this just took out the highs, took out any potential sort of short stops and that up around the top over there, and then moved back down. It just felt a little bit wish-washy for a full blown, hey, metals are back in favor, push to the top side. Like this is when people are getting in or profit taking or whatever you want to say. This is a big, okay, let's do it. This just felt a bit grindy kind of thing for it all. So look, anyway, I still think in the little short term and that, we do have at least minimum a test over here. So holding the 61% in that, it shows that obviously, you're not sort of turning around this whole big sort of downward move in 2 seconds. However, we are sort of finding this very similar to this side over here. So if we could sort of like dribble, and I think I covered this, maybe I've got it on the higher time frame, this idea here that you could sort of say, obviously this is further out, but if this starts to chop around through here and we see, this 44.50 level hold for a period, maybe we roll down, we bounce up here, we roll down, basically kind of sideways chop between 4,500 and 4,550 for a bit to sort of build out a bit more of a sort of a side over here. That could look quite positive for sort of a more sort of long term, okay, maybe not long term, medium term upside move with gold. This is a nice little bounce, but they didn't follow it up on the second one here. I still think potentially, we could see a little bit of a move down into like, the 44.50, 44.60 area to sort of see a higher low within this structure. Get on a lower time frame here. Within this structure here. Like, yes, it's sort of pushed back down here a little bit, but it's not really a sort of concerted drive at the low, higher low, breakout level or break above level to continue up higher here. So we'll see how we go with that. I mean, the bounce is certainly quite strong. Hasn't undone that line there. So again, look, you break up above here, look for that body fill at 4,500, but I would be cautious to be buying this thing till you break above sort of like, really even 45.20. You know what I mean? Like, other than like maybe a short-term bounce buy kind of thing and shit. I think still the risk is for more for the downside here. All right, tick it along. So we got silver. Silver, same sort of thing. Got smacked back down, back up, holding the zone here again. So let's get back onto a decent time frame for a 4 hour here. Um, Look, what can you say? It's just chop, man. It's just sideways. Look, I've actually sort of pulled back on trading too much silver at the moment, for obvious kind of reasons here. I still think this downside move is kind of where it's headed. But again, a decent little bounce. Tried to say it's trying to recapture this midway sort of level, like we've seen it, like this sort of 74.50, 74.60, this kind of zone hold time and time and time and time and time again. I think sort of if you break down underneath here, obviously sort of we're targeting overnight lows at 73.80s, but again, I still think that this has got the pressure to just really it's consolidating at the lows. Like, we keep sort of updating the fib on this thing, um, and the bounces come in. But even at any stage, like, here was the low, 23%, here was the low, just at the 38, here's the low here. Even once we put in that new low back to the 23%, it is still very heavy. And this is a thing, sort of like at the moment, like, that's very well that it's stalled, but, consolidation favors continuation. And it does look like I think we probably are going to be sort of heading lower with this, but silver's not really on my cards at the moment. This is just too wild, sort of up and down, sideways chop. I'd like to see a break either side of this thing, but I think it does favour a downside move. All right, and finally, just sort of tick along. We've got Aussie. Aussie played very well here. We can see it's really sort of just holding this zone where we've seen the sellers. It did try and get up there a little bit earlier. That was on the Friday that it pushed up. Yeah, Friday pushed up, but obviously, as you can see, just absolutely slapped back down here. And it really is just playing into this lower time frame. Where do I have this one marked? This one. The daily, maybe I had it there. There's sort of head and shoulders that we kind of sort of really been sort of like sort of looking at for the last week or so. Look, it did hold. Same sort of thing. Had a nice little bounce back up over here. But I think till you can get a close above 72, I still think you have this sort of level 72.20, which is just going to whack it down. Again, eyes on the dollar, eyes on metals. See what happens with these things here. But I do think, as I sort of covered over the weekend quite extensively, we have this sort of head and shoulders sort of playing out in a sort of short to medium term, which is giving us a price target sub 70 down around sort of high 69s. I do think that that could then potentially be setting up for this higher time frame inverted head and shoulders, which could lead us a period through sort of like, through the summer to second half of the year for a potential break lower on Aussie. Again, that's the bigger picture kind of stuff. It's not something that we can action necessarily. Well, it's not something we can action sort of overnight or during the day. So what we're looking at here is potentially, obviously, sort of like just more chop through here. If we see that move with the dollar break a bit higher, then obviously we're coming back down. 71 really is the kind of level that it needs to be, though, because there's been a very strong level of support all the way through here. Hence why I've got the stop marked out over here, because I think once this does give up, because there's so many people, I'll buy it here, cool, I'll buy it here, put my stop, buy it here, put my stop, buy it here, put my stop. This zone through here, I think is going to be ripe for the taking, even if it does want to go higher, which I don't, that's not my base case. I think there's a chance that sort of you get a sort of bit of a push down, take the stops. But we'll have to sort of wait and see with this. Dollar pushes higher. We're going to see Aussie come down a bit lower, of course. If we do see that sort of move, as I said, revert back from, so if the market starts to go, hey, you know what, Trump is right, and things are sort of looking a bit more rosy, then obviously we're going to see some appreciation. But again, I don't think with so many negative divergence on the higher time frames for Aussie crosses that this is the time that this doesn't, to me, scream structure to then level up and go out the top over here. Certainly it is possible. We did have a move way back when, I can't remember where it was. It was like this one here. So see this was like a little head and shoulders here. And what happened? They absolutely tore it to the top side over there. So, look, it is possible that these things, when they look like a head and shoulders, it just, the market positions for that and then rips out to the top side. But I think sort of, not that I do a lot of sort of like COT data with sort of like major sort of levels of positioning, but the market is pretty heavily long on Aussie. So I would say sort of pretty much sort of like, even if they do want to take it higher, It's probably sort of going to clean out a couple of those stops and then sort of move up higher. So I do think minimum the risk is to be testing down over around 71, 70 slash 80, 90 again. However, if it comes back down here and holds again, I think that could be the time that we see something like this kind of play out. Because look at how many times it tried to get down here previously before it just went bang and ripped everyone up over here. But I think a lot of people were short Aussie at this point over here. This is going back into January, start of the year. So we'll see how we go, but I do think that downside is the risk for Aussie here. All right, and let's just have a quick look at a bit of the data. I think it was pretty quiet actually, sort of through today. We had ISO manufacturing, very strong numbers there from the US overnight. Yeah, manufacturing prices, and not that it really follows manufacturing prices, a little bit of a dip down there, but I think ISM's probably definitely sort of what the market's looking at, and that beat expectation there, which is another thing that supports a little bit of dollar strength, along with that headline that we had sort of coming out there. We got a bit of Aussie data out in about an hour and a half, building approvals, moving in the right direction, still looking weak. These kind of bits of data aren't going to be the ones that sort of move the market. They're just interesting bits to sort of plug in alongside a couple of other bits and pieces as well. We got Italy's got a bank holiday. What they got? National Day. Okay, whatever. Moving forward, private sector credit. Again, I don't think so. Are these still delayed? What's it delayed from? New release time pending. Okay, interesting. Not really anything. Pretty quiet on the data front here. We got CPI over sort of for the euro up a little bit there. That could be a little bit of sort of euro strength, obviously sort of dollar weakness because it's fairly inverted sort of chart with those ones, but nothing that's really sort of we need to be sort of watching a great deal for. Maybe just the jolts tonight, but this is marginally changed. This was like 6.87 last time, 6.86 now. You know, very, very small change there with expectations, but still pretty much flat with what it was previously. All right, that's it from me.